Hey, how's it going everybody? In this video I get a budget spider deck. It's gonna cost about like 65 bucks right now. Pretty cheap still. We're gonna be using the super awesome spider Shelob. The artwork is pretty menacing. It's a pretty cool spider. It's for 6 mana. You're getting an 8/8 with Death Touch and Ward 2. Also, it gives every other spider we control have Death Touch and Ward 2 as well. And whenever another creature dealt damage this turn by a spider you control dies, you get to create a token of that creature, except it's a food token. So it's kind of an interesting thing. We're going to be able to get some additional food tokens kind of for free. As a reminder, when Shelob is in the field, it's going to give every spider we have Death Touch. So as long as the spider deals damage to any creature, that creature will die and we will get food tokens. So a quick overview of the deck. I mean, it's pretty basic. We're going to be playing some pretty cool spiders. Once we have a bunch of spiders in the field, we're going to use certain cards that will make our spiders either do damage to other creatures that will kill them, or we play cards that make our opponent attack into our spiders, forcing those creatures to die, and then we get some free food tokens. This is also a good way to control the board as well. There is an optional strategy that I did not implement in this deck, but you can go like a life gain strategy where you gain a lot of life, but you also drain your opponent as you're gaining life. Just wanted to bring that out there in case that does interest you. I wanted to focus more on just the spiders in this deck. We're going to start off with some pretty cool ones. Hatchery Spider is a little bit of mana. It's 7 cost, but it's a 5/7 with a reach. When we cast this card, the ability Undergrowth can allow us to kind of mill some cards from our deck, and then we get to put a green card or a green permanent from the graveyard onto the battlefield for free. So you definitely get a lot of value there. The artwork on Drider is probably my favorite out of all the spider cards in this deck. It's a 4/3 with reach. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you're going to get a 2/1 black spider with menace and reach. The Doomweaver artwork is pretty menacing because it's basically a black widow. It is a 6 mana 1/8 with reach. However, has Soul Bond, which is a really cool mechanic. You get to pair it with another creature, and as long as these two creatures are soul bonded together, whenever one of these creatures dies, you get to draw cards equal to its power. So if Doomweaver is attached to Hatchery Spider, and Hatchery Spider dies, you get to draw 5 cards. Watcher in the Web can block an additional 7 creatures each combat. I've never seen a card like this before, however this pairs quite well with our commander. Obviously we kind of want this card to have 7 power as well, so if we block 7 creatures then we could kind of kill them all because it will have Death Touch as long as our commander's out. This deck doesn't really have the ability to buff a creature that much, but that could be a really interesting thing if you wanted to try and implement that into this deck. It might not be worth it, but it's also just kind of cool if that does happen. Sweet Gum Recluse is a 0/3 for 7 mana, but Flash, Cascade, and Reach. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to put 3 counters on each of any number target creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. Cascade, in case you don't know, so you're going to play this card for 6 mana. Then you're going to mill the top of your deck until you get, or I think the proper term is called Excavate, but you're going to reveal the top card of your library to reveal something 5 mana or less, and you get to play that card for free. Ishkanana, I think that's how you pronounce it. This is one of my favorite spiders too. For 5 mana, you get a 3/5 with Reach. It does have Delirium, which we can get pretty easily because we're running a lot of artifacts and we do run some Planeswalkers. So if you have Delirium and this card enters the battlefield, you get to put 3 1/2 spider creatures on the battlefield. If you don't have Delirium, you're probably not going to want to play this, so you want to be a little more patient with this card. You can also pay 7 mana and you're going to make your opponent lose 1 life for each spider you control, which again, this deck is all spiders, so you're going to have a pretty good amount on the field. And they could also be spider tokens. It doesn't say non-token spiders. Shelob Dreadweaver is going to allow us to exile all creatures an opponent controls whenever it dies. This kind of gives us some control over their graveyard. This does have an ability that we can put a creature card that was exiled with this card into our owner's graveyard, and then we get to put 2 counters on this card, and we get to draw a card. So for only 3 mana, that's a pretty good amount of value. We can also pay additional mana on the other activated ability to summon creatures that were exiled with this card onto our battlefield. A lot of versatility, really good card for the deck. Arasta is really good against your control decks and kind of maybe even burn decks. It's whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, you get to put a 1/2 green spider token on the battlefield with a reach. So as long as somebody's casting some instances and sorceries, we get to grow our board with spiders. This also is a enchantment, so in the graveyard this does help with Delirium. When Skyfisher Spider enters the battlefield, we can sacrifice another creature, then we can destroy something on our opponent's board. And when this dies, we can also gain some life. Alba Spider is going to deal damage in the form of negative counters, which is interesting. And also whenever we put counters on creatures, we are going to make them lose life and we gain some life. Chainwebber Arachneer is a nice cheap card that can allow us to kind of ping flying cards. We can also escape it and it will enter the battlefield a lot stronger. Kind of just a good spider just to get another name on the board or another spider on the board, but it does have some versatility as well. So these 2 cards are going to allow us to generate a lot of spider tokens. Arachnogenesis allows us to create a lot of spider tokens when a lot of creatures are attacking us. so we can potentially come up with a lot of blockers, and we get to prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. This card pairs insanely well with our commander. If we have a commander out and our opponent attacks into us with a whole bunch of creatures, we can then kind of summon a blocker for every single one of those creatures that are attacking us. Those spiders will have death touch and the other creatures will die, getting us those food tokens, but then also all of our spiders will live because this card protects them. And whenever a non-token creature enchanted player controls dies, we get to exile it, which also gives us some control over the graveyard, and then we get to create a spider token. Mineshaft Spider is not the best card in our deck, but it allows us to get another spider on the board and we get to mill 2 cards. Sporeweb Weaver has hexproof from blue, which is always pretty good and give us some extra kind of sort of protection. And whenever it's dealt damage, we get to gain a life, create a 1/1 sapling creature token. I kind of wish this was a spider instead of a sapling, but it's still pretty good, just allow us to grow our board a little bit more. Rot Widow Pack has an activated ability where we can exile a creature from a graveyard. Then we can create a spider token and each opponent's going to lose a life for every spider we control. All these cards are quite similar. When they either enter the battlefield or die, we're going to get some more spider tokens. Overall, again, just pretty good for the deck because of the spider synergy. Those are all the spiders. Now we're going to kind of get into some of the ways of actually pinging our opponent's creatures to kind of proc our commander's ability more easily. Infectious Bite, Bite Down, and Master's Rebuke are going to allow us to target one of our creatures and then deal damage to one of our opponent's creatures. This does proc our commander because our commander says whenever a creature is dealt damage by a spider you control dies. So as long as our spiders have death touch, this will proc and those creatures will die and we will get the food token. Bushwhack, Prize Fight, and Prey Pawn are pretty similar to the cards previously, however these make it so the creatures fight. So that gives an opportunity for other creatures to deal damage to our spiders, so they can die, which is not the best, but it's okay. Bushwhack is pretty versatile because we can search our library for land just in case we don't want to fight a creature, kind of helping us in a sense ramp or not miss our land drops. Viridian Claw is good because it's going to give our creatures first strike. A creature with first strike and death touch is very powerful. Do not underestimate that, especially for a low mana cost. Viridian Longbow is beast. Every time if it's equipped to a card, every time we tap this, we're gonna deal 1 damage to target creature player. If we have death touch and we ping a creature with this card, that creature will die because death touch works like that. Really powerful for this deck. Back for More is a nice way to get some recursion from our graveyard and then also fight another creature. So just overall pretty good for the deck. And instant speed too, you can surprise some people. Nemesis Mask and Lure are kind of similar. We're going to enchant one of our larger spiders most likely, and then we're going to force our opponent to block all of their creatures on that spider. If the spider has death touch, we're going to kill everything. So pretty cool. Roar of Challenge is quite similar to the 2 previous cards. We're going to force our opponent to block certain things. This next card is fitting because we can give our creatures basically the ability to fight other target creatures just by tapping them. So again, for obvious reasons, pretty good for the deck because if we have death touch, we're just going to make our creatures fight all the other creatures. Moving into some removal. Previous cards can be considered as removal, but I see it more as like the engine of the deck to help us get ahead. This is more dedicated removal in case we have to get things off the field. Crippling Fear is good because we can get rid of a lot of little creatures without actually harming our own. When we choose a creature type, it's obviously going to be spider. Death Sprouts allow us to kill a creature and then we get to kind of ramp a little bit faster. I like the tempo swing with this card. Casualties of War is quite self-explanatory, just remove one of everything. Spider Food and Return to Nature are going to allow us to hit artifacts and enchantments. Spider Food is going to give us a free token too. Putrefy hits artifacts and creatures. Moving on to some more utility stuff. This card's good because it's going to give all of our spiders +1/+1. Whenever this card dies, we're going to gain 4 life, but the main thing here is just going to give our creatures +1/+1. It does have this like secondary effect you can cast it for, however, the main thing we're going to want is the front card, the creature side. Eternal Witness is just a good card to have to get some recursion from our graveyard. We get to pick anything. I like Gliss of the Trader in this deck because we have first strike and death touch, kind of again fitting for the theme. And if whenever a creature an opponent controls put in the graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. Again, we're pinging things a lot with the death touch, so if we have artifacts like the Viridian Bow and stuff like that that do end up in the graveyard, we can return that back to our hand. There is another outlet with this deck that I was looking up where you can go a lot more artifacts and kind of abuse that in a sense. I think that'll be a interesting deck to look into more if you're interested, but I didn't focus on that aspect of the deck because I wanted to, I guess, kind of get a more general approach to it, but it definitely looked powerful. Profane Command is just a overall generally good black card. You can make someone lose life, you get to return something from the graveyard, you get to kill a creature, and you can even give your own creatures fear. Kind of just pretty versatile. Deathcap Cultivators can allow us to fix our mana a little bit, and if we have Delirium, this will have Death Touch. I like Hooded Blightfang in this deck because whenever a creature we control with Death Touch attacks which will be a lot of our creatures. Each opponent will lose 1 life and you're going to gain 1 life. I also love how it says each opponent, so if you're playing with multiple people. Also, whenever a creature we control with Death Touch deals damage to a Planeswalker, we just destroy that Planeswalker. Because of the amount of Death Touch we have in this deck, I think this card is pretty powerful. Village Rites is going to allow us to draw 2 cards if we sacrifice a creature. Life Crafters, Bestiary is going to allow us to scry each turn, and if whenever we play a creature, we could pay an extra green and you get to draw a card. I like to put this card in almost any deck that runs green just because of the ability to see the next card you're going to draw, as well as draw some additional cards too if you're playing a lot of creatures. Swiftfoot Boots is pretty standard, you kind of just put that almost in any commander deck. Lost Spider Queen is kind of expensive, but if you're playing a spider deck, the deck's pretty cheap anyway. This card's just too cool. Probably will come down in price. Whenever creature control dies, we're going to get an additional counter on this. For 0, we get to draw a card, lose a life. -3, we get to put 2 spider tokens on the battlefield with Menace and Lifelink. And the ultimate's just going to kind of drain your opponent for a lot. Vraska's minus ability, we're going to put some other tokens on the battlefield with Death Touch, and they can easily destroy Planeswalkers. However, the passive abilities, whenever a creature control with Death Touch dealt damage to a player or a Planeswalker, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. These 3 cards kind of help us manipulate our food. We can tap Gilded Goose and sacrifice a food and kind of fix our mana. We can also create additional food tokens if we need. Whenever Savvy Hunter attacks or blocks, we're going to create some more food tokens. Then we can sacrifice those foods to draw additional cards. When Greta enters the battlefield, we create a food token. Then we can pay mana to sacrifice and put counters on creatures, or we can sacrifice a food and then draw a card. We're also going to lose a life. These 3 cards are shapeshifters, so when they're on the field, they're spiders. When Bloodline Pretender's on the field, whenever another creature of the chosen type, so we're obviously going to choose Spider, enters the battlefield under our control, get to put a +1 counter on this card. When Masked Vandal enters the battlefield, we get exile a creature card from our graveyard, and if we do, we get to exile artifact or enchantment opponent controls. When Realm Walker enters the battlefield, we're going to pick Spider. This card also gives us the ability to look at a top card of the library at any time, and we may cast any of those creature spells from the top of our library as long as they're spiders, or I mean, I guess you can choose whatever you want, but in this deck you're picking Spider. Moving on to some ramp. This deck I wouldn't say needs it, but for commander in general, you usually just run some ramp cards just to kind of get ahead. Rampant Growth and Nature's Lore are pretty standard in pretty much any green deck or any deck that runs green. Same thing with Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. If you like playing green, definitely pick these cards up. They're cheap and you can put them pretty much put them in any deck. Moving on to some mana rocks. Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, again pretty standard mana fixing cards. Golgari Signet and Talisman of Resilience are the Golgari mana rocks. I would definitely pick them up from this deck. Don't skimp out on these. Moving on to the lands, Command Tower, pretty standard. Unclaimed Territory is good in this deck because when it enters the battlefield you can choose Spider. This will allow you to add any color of mana as long as you're casting that chosen creature type. These 2 cards, again pretty standard, almost in every commander deck you're going to want. These are some black-green dual land options that are pretty budget, and also here's some more. Again, these are pretty cheap, just throw them in the deck until you get better upgrades. Relentless Cottage is a dual land, but it's also a creature land, and whenever you attack you're going to get a food token too. The Shrine is also pretty good in this deck because we can tap it and create additional food tokens if we need. Grim Backwards is good because we can sacrifice some creature and draw some cards. Good for probably later in the game, and also if we have a lot of tokens in the field we don't necessarily need. I like Rogue's Passage just because it can give something unblockable and push in from some extra damage if you need. Wouldn't say it's absolutely needed in the deck, but it comes in handy. And for the remainder of the lands, we're running 12 forests and 9 swamps. This puts us at about 35 lands. Anyway, that kind of rounds out the deck tech. I definitely missed out on some cool cards, so let me know down below what I should add to the deck. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed. Stay tuned for some more Magic the Gathering videos while staying on a budget. Take care, everybody.